Your grandmother is dead. I practiced saying those words out loud, staring at my reflection in my laptop screen. God, I hated how easily the lie rolled off my tongue. But here's the thing. Sometimes you have to lie to save the people you love most, even when those same people are trying to kill them. Let me back up. I'm Maya Williams, 28 years old, and up until 3 days ago, I thought I had a pretty good handle on my life. I'm a detective with the Atlanta PD. Youngest black woman to make detective in my precinct's history, if you want the stats. I built my career on reading people, on seeing through their lies and getting to the truth. Turns out, I should have been reading my own family a little closer. It started with surveillance footage. 3:47 a.m., 3 days ago, my 90-year-old grandmother walking out of Sunset Manor assisted living like she owned the place. Now you have to understand, Grandma Essie had supposedly been deep in dementia for months. Couldn't remember her own name half the time, or so everyone kept telling me. But watching that footage, she moved like a woman with a plan. Not confused, not wandering, purposeful. Like she knew exactly where every security camera was positioned. Maya, honey, you need to eat something. My mother's voice cut through my thoughts. Patricia Williams set a plate of cold fried chicken next to my laptop, and I studied her face like I would any suspect. Dark circles under her eyes, nervous energy, hands that couldn't stay still. I'm fine, Mama, I lied, rewinding the footage for what felt like the 100th time. Here's what scared me most. I was starting to recognize the signs. 20 years of sitting across from liars in interrogation rooms, and I was seeing all the same tells in my own mother. The way she wouldn't meet my eyes. How she kept asking if I'd heard from anyone about Grandma Essie. The careful way she phrased every question. My phone rang, and I swear my heart tried to punch its way out of my chest. Ms. Williams. Dr. Ramirez from Sunset Manor. And he sounded like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. There's been a development with your grandmother's medical records. We need to talk immediately. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What kind of development? Not over the phone. Can you come in right now? As I hung up, I caught my mother's reflection in the laptop screen. She was staring at me with the expression of a woman calculating whether to run or fight. You know what the really messed up part is? I'd built my entire career on one simple truth. Everyone lies. I just never imagined that would include the people who raised me, who I trusted more than anyone in the world. What I was about to discover wouldn't just solve my grandmother's disappearance. It was going to destroy everything I thought I knew about my own family. And the worst part? I was going to have to pretend to be surprised by every single revelation. Dr. Ramirez's office smelled like disinfectant and guilt. I sat across from his desk with my mother, watching him shuffle papers like he was dealing cards for the world's worst poker game. The fluorescent lights made everyone look sickly, which seemed fitting given what he was about to tell us. There's no easy way to say this, he started, and I immediately went into cop mode. When someone opens with that line, they're about to drop a bomb that's going to change your life. Your grandmother's dementia diagnosis. There appear to be irregularities. My mother's hand found mine, squeezing tight. At the time, I thought it was comfort. Now I know it was panic. What kind of irregularities? I asked, though part of me already knew. You develop a sixth sense for these things. The medication she was prescribed, it wasn't standard dementia treatment. In fact, some of these drugs could cause memory issues, confusion, disorientation. He slid a folder across the desk like he was passing me a loaded gun. I've been reviewing her files since she disappeared, and I'm concerned Mrs. Williams may have been deliberately mismedicated. The words hit me like a physical punch. Are you saying someone was drugging my grandmother? Making her seem sicker than she was? Dr. Ramirez nodded, and I watched my entire world start to crumble. And there's more. The financial records show systematic withdrawals from her accounts. Small amounts over time, nothing that would trigger alerts, but over the past year. He paused, like he was afraid to say the number. Nearly $200,000 is missing. My mother gasped beside me, but I was watching her in my peripheral vision. Her surprise seemed performed, like she'd rehearsed this reaction. Who had access to her accounts? I asked, though I was starting to suspect I already knew. Family members with power of attorney. In this case, that would be her son, Your Uncle Charles. Uncle Charles. The man who'd convinced our family that I was too young, too inexperienced to handle Grandma's care. Who'd sweet-talked his way into controlling everything while I was focused on building my career. Where is he now? My voice came out steady, but inside I was screaming. That's the thing, Dr. Ramirez said quietly. He's missing too. Left town the same night your grandmother disappeared. I sat there, processing the betrayal, when my phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. We need to talk. Auburn Avenue church basement. Come alone. E for Essie. Grandma Essie was alive, and she was reaching out to me. But why the secrecy? Why not just come home? Unless she knew she couldn't trust anyone else in the family. Let me tell you something about my grandmother that might help you understand what happened next. Essie Mae Williams didn't just raise me, she trained me. While other kids were playing video games, I was sitting on her porch learning to read people like books. I was driving through Atlanta's rain-soaked streets, my mind racing faster than my Crown Vic's engine, when a memory hit me so hard I nearly pulled over. I was 7 years old, and a man in a cheap suit was at our front door. Door-to-door salesman, he said, with exclusive investment opportunities for seniors. Grandma Essie invited him in for sweet tea, listening to his whole pitch about guaranteed returns and limited-time offers. She nodded and smiled, playing the perfect mark. Then she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more threat than a shout. Now honey, you see that picture on my mantle? That's my granddaughter Maya. She's gonna be a detective someday. And detectives don't take kindly to folks who steal from old ladies. You understand what I'm telling you? The man fled so fast he left his briefcase behind. Inside I found fake credentials, forged documents, and a list of elderly targets throughout the city. Baby girl, Grandma Essie had said while we cataloged the evidence together. The most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone underestimates. Remember that. Someday it might save both our lives. I was starting to think that someday had arrived. My phone rang as I pulled into a parking lot to collect my thoughts. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Maya. The voice was weak, trembling, but I'd recognize it anywhere. Grandma? Grandma Essie. Where are you? I gripped the phone so hard I thought I might crack the screen. Baby, the sound of a door slamming in the background. Her voice dropped to a terrified whisper. I can't talk long. But I need you to know. I remember everything. The medicine they gave me, it's wearing off. Charles, he's not working alone. Static crackled through the line, and I could hear footsteps approaching. Grandma, tell me where you are. I'll come get you right now. Listen carefully. The old church on Auburn Avenue, you remember? Where we used to go for Wednesday service. Look in the basement. But Maya. Male voices in the background, urgent and angry. Don't trust anyone in the family. Promise me. They're watching. The line went dead with a sharp click. I sat there staring at my phone, my grandmother's words echoing in my head. Don't trust anyone in the family. How deep did this conspiracy go? My mother? My cousins? How many people I'd loved my entire life were part of this? But there was something else bothering me, something about Grandma's voice. Yes, she'd sounded terrified, but underneath the fear, I'd caught something else. A note of purpose? Like someone following a script they'd rehearsed. I shook my head. That was crazy. My 90-year-old grandmother was being held captive by people who'd been drugging her for months. Of course she was terrified. Still, as I drove toward Auburn Avenue, I couldn't shake the feeling that Essie Mae Williams was about to teach me the most important lesson of my life. The Ebenezer Baptist Church on Auburn Avenue has always been sacred ground to me, not just because of Dr. King, though walking where he preached gives you chills, but because it's where Grandma Essie taught me about justice. Every Wednesday evening service, she'd point to that pulpit and remind me that the fight for what's right never ends. Now I was breaking into that same church, and I felt like I was desecrating everything it stood for. Using lockpicks I'd borrowed from evidence lockup. Don't ask, and I won't have to lie about how I learned to use them. I slipped into the basement. The space felt like a tomb, musty air thick with decades of history, stacked folding chairs that had held countless congregations, Christmas decorations that had brightened generations of celebrations. But in the far corner, Behind a stack of hymnals that looked like they hadn't been touched since the Carter administration, I found what my grandmother had left for me. A manila envelope wrapped in plastic, protected like it contained the secrets of the universe. Which, as it turned out, it did. The documents inside didn't just shock me, they made me physically sick. Medical records showing deliberate overdoses of psychoactive drugs. Financial statements revealing a conspiracy that made Uncle Charles look like small time. Bank routing numbers, medication schedules, and names. So many names of elderly victims I'd never heard of. But the document that made my blood freeze was at the bottom. A partnership agreement between Charles Williams and Sunset Manor's administrator, dated 18 months ago. The letterhead at the top read, Operation Golden Sunset. They had a name for it. A systematic plan to identify, drug, and rob elderly residents across 3 states. This wasn't family desperation. This was organized crime. I was photographing everything with shaking hands when my phone buzzed. Stop looking or your grandmother dies. You have 24 hours to destroy what you found and forget this ever happened. We're watching you right now. I spun around, scanning the basement shadows, but saw only darkness. Then I heard it, the soft creak of footsteps on the stairs above. Someone was coming down. I looked up to see a figure emerging from the basement shadows, and my heart shattered into a million pieces. My cousin Derek, Uncle Charles's son, stepped into the dim light, pointing a gun directly at my chest. This was Derek who'd taught me to ride a bike. Derek who'd defended me from bullies in middle school. Derek who I'd trusted with my deepest secrets growing up. Now he was pointing a weapon at me, and his eyes were cold as winter. I really hoped it wouldn't come to this, Maya, he said, and I could hear genuine regret in his voice. But regret doesn't stop bullets. But you always were too smart for your own good. Here's something they don't teach you in police academy. How to negotiate with someone you've loved your entire life when they're pointing a gun at your heart. Derek. I kept my voice steady, falling back on my training. Always keep talking, always look for an opening. What the hell is going on? You know what's going on. You found the papers. His hand was shaking slightly. Good, nervous people make mistakes. But this was also Derek, who'd never been able to hurt a fly. At least, that's what I'd thought. Dad never wanted to involve family, but you wouldn't let it go. Where is she, Derek? Where's Grandma Essie? Somewhere safe. For now. He gestured with the gun, and I noticed he held it like someone who'd learned from movies, not training. His grip was wrong, stance amateur. If I could get close enough. But that depends on you. Walk away from this, Maya. Tell everyone she's probably dead. That she wandered off and won't be found. Do that, and she gets to live out her days in peace. I was calculating angles and distances when it hit me. What he'd just said. How many of you are involved? Mom knows, doesn't she? Derek's face gave him away. It's a micro-expression you learn to read in interrogation rooms. The slight widening of eyes, the involuntary tightening around the mouth. Surprise mixed with guilt. My mother was part of this. My own mother had helped drug and rob her own mother. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to stay focused. Emotion gets you killed in situations like this. The family business hasn't been doing well, Maya, Derek continued, his voice gaining confidence as he justified the unjustifiable. Mom's salon, my construction company, Dad's investments, we all needed help. And Grandma Essie was just sitting on all that money, getting sicker every day. We told ourselves we were just accelerating the inevitable. By poisoning her? By stealing her memories? I took a small step forward. She called me Derek. She remembers everything now. Fear flashed across his face. That's impossible. Dr. Ramirez said. Dr. Ramirez is involved too, isn't he? How much is he getting paid to keep quiet about the other victims? Derek's silence was answer enough. I took another step, close enough now that I could see the sweat beading on his forehead. Don't, he warned, raising the gun higher. I don't want to hurt you, Maya, but I will if I have to. Too much is at stake now. What about Mrs. Henderson? Mr. Jackson? All the other people you've been drugging and robbing? Don't their children deserve to know the truth? They'll never find out. The records are being destroyed, money's being moved offshore. In 6 months, we'll all disappear and start fresh somewhere else. His voice grew stronger, more determined. Except for you. You were never supposed to be a cop, Maya. Never supposed to be so good at digging into things. That's when it all clicked into place. This is why Mom pushed me to stay away from Grandma's care. Why Uncle Charles insisted on handling everything himself. You all planned this from the beginning. Not from the beginning, Derek admitted. But when we realized how much money she had, and saw how the dementia was progressing naturally, it seemed like a victimless crime. She wasn't going to remember anyway. I felt something cold and furious settle in my chest. The same feeling I got when interrogating child abusers and wife beaters. There's just one problem with your plan, Derek. What's that? You forgot who raised me. I dove sideways as Derek fired, the bullet splintering the wooden beam where my head had been. Rolling behind a stack of folding chairs, I had my service weapon in my hand before I'd even stopped moving. Maya. Derek's voice was panicked now. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Where is she, Derek? Last chance. Go to hell. I heard his footsteps running toward the back exit. For half a second, I had a clear shot. Family or not, I could have ended this right there. But I couldn't pull the trigger. Despite everything, he was still the boy who'd taught me to throw a curveball. Besides, I had a better plan. Derek was going to lead me straight to my grandmother. I followed Derek through Atlanta like a hunter tracking wounded prey, staying far enough back to avoid detection, but close enough to keep his taillights in sight. My phone had been buzzing nonstop. Missed calls from my mother, my captain, even Dr. Ramirez. I ignored them all. There would be time for explanations later, after I found Grandma Essie. Derek led me through neighborhoods that told the story of Atlanta's economic struggles, past strip malls with more for lease signs than open businesses, through residential areas where dreams had been foreclosed and boarded up. Finally, he pulled into the parking lot of what looked like the set of a post-apocalyptic movie, the abandoned Milliken textile factory. I parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, using the urban decay as cover. The factory loomed against the Georgia sky like a monument to everything America had lost, its broken windows staring out like dead eyes. But someone had been using this place recently. Fresh tire tracks in the mud, cigarette butts that weren't bleached by weather, and most telling of all, a thin wisp of smoke rising from somewhere deep inside. My phone vibrated with a text. Maya, please call me. We can work this out. Mom. I stared at the message, feeling sick. Even now, she was trying to manipulate me, trying to control the situation. How many family dinners had been performances while they slowly killed Grandma Essie? I turned off the phone and slipped through an unlocked service door. The interior was an industrial nightmare. Rusted machinery that looked like metal monsters, collapsed scaffolding creating obstacle courses, and everywhere the smell of decay and abandonment. But I moved through it with purpose, following the sound of voices deeper into the building. As I got closer, I could make out words. Told you she was too dangerous to leave alone. That girl's got cop instincts in her blood. She's still family, Charles. We can't just make her disappear like some stranger. Uncle Charles's laugh was bitter, echoing off the concrete walls. Family? We crossed that line months ago, Derek. We can't go back now. I crept closer until I could see into the makeshift room they'd created. Uncle Charles stood with his back to me, talking to someone I couldn't see clearly. Derek sat at a folding table with a laptop, presumably moving money between accounts. And in the corner, tied to a chair but alert and watching everything, Grandma Essie. She looked older, frielier than I remembered, but her eyes were sharp and aware. The medication was definitely wearing off. As I watched, her gaze found mine through the shadows, and here's the thing that still gives me chills. She didn't look surprised. She didn't react at all, didn't give me away. It was like she'd been expecting me. I should have called for backup. Any reasonable cop would have retreated, called in the cavalry, and waited for official help to arrive. But reasonable cops don't usually find their own grandmothers being held hostage by their own families. I pulled out my phone and started a voice recording. If something happened to me, at least there would be evidence. Can't stay here much longer, someone was saying. A voice I didn't recognize, rough and dangerous. Every hour we keep her alive increases the risk. She's family, Derek protested weakly, and I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, somewhere deep down, my cousin still had a conscience. Family. Uncle Charles's voice was full of bitter rage. Family doesn't steal from family, Derek. But that's exactly what we've been doing, isn't it? We've been stealing from this old woman for months, telling ourselves it was justified because she was sick. Well, now she's not sick anymore, and she knows everything. I crept closer until I was just outside the circle of harsh work lights. Grandma Essie sat perfectly still, but I could see her working at the ropes around her wrists. Apparently, some skills never fade. The plan was always to make it look like an accident, Charles continued. Confused old woman wanders off, dies of exposure. Natural causes. But now that Maya's involved. We handle Maya the same way, the stranger said coldly. Car accident on a dark road. Happens all the time to cops who work too hard, drive when they're exhausted. That was enough. I stepped into the light, my weapon trained on Uncle Charles. Atlanta PD. Nobody move. Derek scrambled for his gun, but I swung my weapon toward him. Don't even think about it, Derek. The stranger, a thin man with prison tattoos covering his arms, slowly raised his hands, but his eyes were calculating. I recognized the look. Predator sizing up prey. Maya, Uncle Charles said, his voice switching to that smooth, paternal tone I remembered from childhood. The tone that had convinced me he was looking out for Grandma's best interests. You don't understand what's really happening here. I understand perfectly. You've been drugging and robbing elderly people, including your own mother. I found the records, Charles. All of them. Those records are forgeries, he said smoothly. Dr. Ramirez is trying to cover up his own mistakes by framing our family. Your grandmother has been legitimately ill, Maya. What you're seeing now is just a temporary lucid moment. They happen sometimes. I looked at Grandma Essie, and she shook her head almost imperceptibly. Her eyes were clear, alert, and absolutely furious. Is that true, Grandma? Are you confused about what's been happening to you? Essie Mae Williams straightened in her chair. And when she spoke, her voice carried all the strength and dignity of her 90 years. Baby girl, I've never been more clear about anything in my life. These men have been poisoning me, stealing from me, and planning to kill me. The only confusion I have is how I raised a son who could do such things to his own mother. Charles's facade cracked. You senile old. That's enough. I cut him off. Derek, slide your weapons over here. All of you get on the ground. The stranger spoke for the first time. There's just one problem with your plan, detective. What's that? You're outnumbered. I heard footsteps behind me and spun around to see the person whose betrayal would haunt me for the rest of my life. My mother entered the room with a gun in her hands. I want you to imagine the worst betrayal you've ever experienced. Now multiply that by 1,000, and you might come close to what I felt watching my own mother point a gun at me. Patricia Williams's face was streaked with tears, but her weapon was steady. I'm sorry, baby, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to get hurt. Mom. The word came out like a prayer, like a plea for this to be some kind of nightmare. You too? All this time you too. She was crying openly now, her entire body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from her soul. I never wanted it to go this far, Maya. It was just supposed to be temporary, just until we could get back on our feet. The salon was failing. We were going to lose the house, lose everything we'd worked for. So you decided to drug your own mother? My voice rose with each word. 28 years of love and trust turning to ash. Your own mother, who raised you, who sacrificed everything for this family. She was already getting sick. Patricia screamed, her facade cracking completely. The dementia was real, Maya. It was just progressing slowly. We just helped it along a little, took what we needed to survive. She wasn't going to remember anyway. She wasn't going to miss money she'd forgotten she had. I kept my weapon trained on Charles, but I could feel my mother's gun pointed at my back like a knife between my shoulder blades. In my peripheral vision, Derek was reaching for his weapon again, the stranger tensing for action. 4 against 1. In seconds, I'd be dead. That's when 90-year-old Essie Mae Williams reminded everyone in the room why you should never underestimate a woman who'd survived the Great Depression, Jim Crow, and 9 decades of American history. The rope around her wrists fell away like magic. She'd been working at her bonds throughout the entire confrontation with the patient precision of someone who'd been planning this moment. She grabbed the folding chair she'd been tied to and swung it with the accumulated strength of 90 years of survival. Derek screamed as the chair connected with his gun hand. I spun and tackled my mother, both of us crashing to the concrete floor in a tangle of limbs and heartbreak. Her gun skittered away like a metallic spider fleeing the light. "Everybody freeze!" I shouted, but the stranger was already moving, pulling a knife from his boot and lunging toward Essie Mae with murder in his eyes. Charles dove for Derek's dropped gun. I had a split second to make 2 impossible shots while my own mother lay crying beneath me. Time slowed. 2 quick shots, one into the concrete near Charles's reaching hand, sending sparks flying, the other into the knife wielder's shoulder. The blade clattered away as he screamed. I said freeze. I was back on my feet, weapon moving between targets. Next shot won't be a warning. That's when my phone rang. "Captain Morrison. I have to answer this," I told the room. Nobody moves. "Williams. Where the hell are you? We've got reports of shots fired, and your mother called in hysterical saying you'd gone rogue." I looked at Patricia Williams, sobbing on the floor, and felt something break inside me. Even now, she'd been trying to make me look like the unstable one. "Captain, I need multiple units at the old Milliken Textile Factory on Industrial Boulevard. I've got 4 suspects in custody for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. One needs medical attention for a gunshot wound." "Jesus Christ, Maya. Are you hurt?" "No, sir. But I'm going to need internal affairs here too. This case involves my family." As I hung up, I looked around at the wreckage of everything I'd once held dear. My grandmother sat quietly, dignity intact despite everything. My mother continued crying. Uncle Charles stared at the floor in defeat. Derek cradled his shattered hand. The stranger focused on staying conscious. "Why?" I asked the room. "Why her? She would have given you anything if you'd just asked." "Would she?" Charles looked up, his eyes full of bitter resentment. "Our whole lives, she controlled everything. The money, who got help when they needed it. She played favorites, Maya. You were her golden child. The rest of us were just disappointments." I stared at him in disbelief. "So you poisoned her? Stole her memories because you felt unloved? We took what should have been ours anyway," Derek said through gritted teeth. "What difference did it make if we got it now or after she died?" That's when my grandmother stood up, and I watched her reclaim her power. "The difference," Essie Mae Williams said, walking slowly toward her son, "is that I trusted you. I loved you. I would have given my life for any of you. And instead, you tried to take my life from me." She stopped in front of Charles, this tiny woman facing down her much larger son. "You want to know about playing favorites? You're right. I did play favorites. I favored the grandchild who visited me every week, who listened to my stories, who treated me like a human being instead of an obstacle to an inheritance." I felt tears streaming down my face as I watched her speak truth to the people who tried to destroy her. "But you know what the real tragedy is, Charles? If you'd just asked, if any of you had just asked, I would have helped. But you chose to steal instead of ask. You chose to hurt instead of love. And that choice has consequences." The sound of sirens was getting closer. Justice was coming. The next few hours were a blur of procedures and processing that felt like someone else's life. I watched my family members led away in handcuffs. My mother crying, Uncle Charles silent and defeated, Derek still glaring at me like this was somehow my fault. Dr. Ramirez had been arrested at Sunset Manor, along with 2 orderlies who'd helped with the conspiracy. The investigation was expanding rapidly as detectives uncovered the full scope of what they were calling Operation Golden Sunset. I sat in the back of an ambulance while a paramedic checked Grandma Essie's vital signs. Despite everything she'd endured, she was remarkably composed. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked her. "Planning what, baby girl?" "Getting me to find those records. Leading me to the church basement. You knew I'd follow the breadcrumbs." She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in months. "I may have been drugged, but I wasn't stupid. Those medicines made it hard to think clearly, But I still knew something was wrong. I started fighting the medication whenever I could, spitting out pills, pretending to be more confused than I was. And the phone call? I'd been planning that for weeks, waiting for the right moment when Charles would be distracted. I knew if I could just contact you, tell you about the church, you'd put the pieces together. She gripped my hand. I trained you well, didn't I? I laughed despite everything. You did, Grandma. You really did. Captain Morrison approached. Williams, hell of a job tonight. Preliminary count shows at least 15 victims across 3 facilities. Financial Crimes thinks we're looking at over $3 million in fraud. What about my family? His expression grew somber. They're all cooperating now, trying to cut deals. Your mother especially, she's giving us names, account numbers, everything. It's going to be a long process, but we'll recover most of the money. There's something else, Morrison continued. The FBI wants to meet with you about heading up a joint task force on elder fraud. Interested? I looked at my grandmother. What do you think, Grandma? I think, Essie May said with a grin, that some people are about to learn what happens when you mess with the Williams women. 6 months later, I stood at a podium in the federal courthouse, looking out at faces that represented hope. Elderly victims who'd thought justice was impossible. Their families who'd refused to give up. Law enforcement officers from across the Southeast, all learning the Williams Protocol. Operation Golden Years has recovered over $12 million in stolen assets, I announced. More importantly, we've identified and shut down 43 criminal networks across 17 states. In the front row, Grandma Essie sat like a queen, wearing her best church dress and a smile that could power the building. At 91, she'd become a symbol, proof that age doesn't mean helpless, that being elderly doesn't mean being stupid. After the press conference, reporters surrounded her. The most important thing to remember, she was saying, is that family, real family, protects each other. They don't prey on each other like vultures. Later, we sat on her apartment balcony, sharing iced tea and watching Atlanta's sunset. Any regrets? I asked. About what happened to Mom and Uncle Charles? I regret that it happened, she said carefully. But I don't regret exposing the truth. Patricia will serve 18 months, probably out in 12. She was weak, not evil. There's a difference. Dr. Ramirez got 15 years federal. The nursing home administrator got 12. The whole operation is finished. Good. And the other families? Most of the money's been recovered. The victims who are still alive are getting their assets back, plus interest. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights begin to twinkle. Grandma, I said finally, I have a question. What's that, baby girl? When you first realized what was happening, why didn't you try to escape earlier? Why wait until your birthday? She laughed, that sound full of mischief and satisfaction. Because I wanted to make sure I lived to see 90. I wanted to prove they hadn't beaten me. And I wanted to give you the greatest gift I could. The chance to be the hero I always knew you could be. I felt tears in my eyes. Mission accomplished, Grandma. As we sat there, I reflected on everything that had changed. I'd lost most of my family to prison sentences and broken trust. But I'd gained something more valuable. The certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. Essie Mae Williams had vanished on her 90th birthday. 3 days later, we'd found her exactly where no one expected. Not as a helpless victim, but as the architect of her own rescue. At 90, she was just getting started. 1 year later, I was in the gleaming conference room of the National Center for Elder Protection, watching FBI Director Sarah Chun present our annual report to Congress. The numbers were staggering. Over 200 arrests, $43 million recovered, dozens of criminal networks dismantled. The Williams Protocol was now implemented in all 50 states, providing guidelines for protecting elderly victims. My phone buzzed. Watching you on C-SPAN. Very proud. Still coming for Sunday dinner? Grandma. I smiled and typed back. Wouldn't miss it. Making your famous peach cobbler? Of course. And I have news. At 91, Essie Mae Williams continued to surprise everyone. Since recovering from the medication-induced confusion, she'd become an advocate for elderly rights, testifying before Congress, speaking at conferences, working with me to train officers across the country. Later that day, I found her in the community garden at her new apartment complex, teaching other residents how to grow tomatoes. The secret, she was saying, is knowing that just because something looks fragile doesn't mean it can't survive. These plants have strong roots. They can weather storms you wouldn't believe. I recognized the lesson within the lesson. She'd never stopped teaching. We sat on her balcony afterward, sharing iced tea and watching the sunset. So what's this news? I asked. Her eyes twinkled with mischief. I've been invited to speak at the International Conference on Elder Rights in Geneva. The United Nations wants to hear about our case. I nearly choked on my tea. The United Nations? Grandma, that's incredible. At 91, I'm finally going to see the world. She patted my hand. And they want you to come too, as my co-presenter. I stared at her in amazement. The woman who'd been written off as senile was now being invited to address world leaders. There's something else, she continued. I've been thinking about writing a book. About what happened to us, but also about how families can protect each other. How to recognize abuse, fight back, get help. That's wonderful, Grandma. We could help so many people, she corrected. I want you to write it with me. My story, your investigation, practical advice for families and law enforcement. I felt tears welling up. I'd be honored. We sat in comfortable silence, watching Atlanta's lights begin to twinkle. Maya, my grandmother said softly. Do you ever regret what happened? Losing so much of our family. I considered carefully. I regret that it happened at all. I regret that people I loved were capable of such cruelty. But I don't regret exposing the truth. I don't regret fighting for justice. And I definitely don't regret saving you. Good. Because there's one more thing I need to tell you. I turned to look at her. And she was smiling with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure, unbridled pride mixed with something that looked like triumph. What is it, Grandma? The night I disappeared from Sunset Manor, I wasn't trying to escape. I was orchestrating the most important performance of my life. My mouth fell open. What do you mean? I planned every single detail, baby girl. I knew Charles was coming to move me to that facility in Birmingham, where I'd disappear forever. So I decided to disappear on my own terms, at a time and place that would force my brilliant granddaughter to investigate. I stared at her as impossible pieces clicked into place. You planned your own kidnapping? I planned my own rescue, she corrected. Think about it, Maya. If I'd just told you what was happening, would you have believed me? The medication made me seem confused, unreliable. My own family was telling everyone I was losing my mind. But if I disappeared under mysterious circumstances, if I left the right clues in the right places. The church basement. The hidden documents. The phone call from the factory. My voice grew stronger with each realization. You knew I'd trace everything. You knew I'd follow the breadcrumbs you left. I knew Charles would take me somewhere isolated, somewhere he felt safe. I knew you'd find a way to track that call, follow the leads, put the pieces together. She gripped my hand. I just had to stay alive long enough for you to find me. And I had to trust that when the moment came, you'd be brave enough to save us both. I felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of her plan, by the faith she'd had in me. Grandma, that was incredibly dangerous. What if I hadn't found the records? What if Derek had killed you before I got there? Essie Mae Williams looked at me with eyes that held 91 years of accumulated wisdom, strength, and absolute love. Baby girl, she said. I raised you. I knew exactly how good you were at your job, exactly how much you loved me, and exactly how far you'd go to protect family, real family. I never doubted for a second that you'd save me. The only question was whether you'd be strong enough to save yourself in the process. I laughed despite myself. So the first twist was discovering my own family was trying to kill you. The second was learning you'd orchestrated your own rescue. What's the third twist, Grandma? Because knowing you, there's always a third twist. Essie Mae Williams smiled the smile of a woman who'd lived long enough to see justice done, family restored, and legacy secured. The third twist, my dear granddaughter, is that this was never really about the money they stole, or even about saving my life. This was about making sure you became the person you were always meant to be. The person who would dedicate her life to protecting people who can't protect themselves. The person who would change the world, one case at a time. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. That morning's Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Local detectives' elder abuse task force saves hundreds of lives. Recovers millions in stolen assets. I've been carrying this around all day, she said. Waiting for the right moment to show you. This is what I wanted for your birthday gift, Maya. Not just justice for what happened to me, but the knowledge that you'd found your true calling. That you'd become the hero I always knew you could be. I looked at the clipping, then at my grandmother, then out at Atlanta spreading below us. Somewhere out there were elderly people sleeping safely, because of the work we'd started. Somewhere were families who would never experience the betrayal that had nearly destroyed ours. Thank you, Grandma, I whispered. For everything. For believing in me, for trusting me. For teaching me that sometimes the most dangerous person in any room really is the one everyone underestimates. You're welcome, baby girl. But don't thank me yet. We've still got a book to write, a speech to give in Geneva, and about 1,000 more criminals to catch. As the stars began to appear in the Georgia sky, I sat with my remarkable grandmother and planned our next move in the war against those who prey on the vulnerable. At 29, I'd found my life's purpose. At 91, Essie Mae Williams had found her second act. And somewhere in the distance, the lights of Atlanta twinkled like promises of justice yet to come.